They laughed at Sweden's creation. They mocked it as nothing more than a toy, a lightweight machine that couldn't possibly challenge the giants of modern warfare. When the Gripen-E was unveiled, critics from larger nations smirked. They compared it to the massive and expensive fighters of the United States, especially the F-35, and declared that Sweden's effort was destined to fail. After all, how could a small Nordic country with a fraction of the budget stand against the world's most expensive and technologically hyped jet? But what they didn't realize was that the Gripen was never designed to play by the same rules. It was crafted with a philosophy that turned weakness into strength, silence into strategy, and simplicity into a weapon more dangerous than they could imagine. The story begins in the cold north, where Sweden knew it could never compete dollar for dollar with the military superpowers. Instead of building the heaviest, fastest, and most intimidating jet, they built something cunning. Gripen was small, but small meant harder to see. Gripen was lighter, but lighter meant faster to deploy. It didn't carry as many weapons, but every missile it carried could be launched with devastating accuracy. And unlike the F-35, which required enormous bases and expensive infrastructure, the Gripen could land on highways, rearm in minutes, and take off again before enemies even realized what happened. It was like a fox among lions, outnumbered but sly enough to survive. The F-35 was hailed as the future, a flying supercomputer worth over $1 trillion in development. It promised stealth, sensors, and dominance in the skies. Nations bent under pressure to buy it, believing that without the F-35, they would be defenseless. Yet, behind closed doors, pilots whispered of its flaws, the maintenance nightmares, the reliance on complex software, and the inability to fight without a massive logistical chain behind it. Meanwhile, the Gripen quietly evolved. Sweden poured genius into efficiency. The Gripen-E wasn't just an aircraft, it was a symbol of defiance, showing that brains could outmaneuver budgets. The first real humiliation came during joint exercises. NATO pilots, used to the F-35's radar-absorbing cloak, were shocked when Gripen's electronic warfare system lit up the battlefield like a magician pulling tricks out of thin air. Gripen could jam, blind, and confuse enemy sensors, turning the F-35's greatest strength into weakness. In simulated battles, pilots flying the Gripen slipped behind the expensive American jets, locking them in crosshairs before they even knew they were being tracked. Reports leaked slowly, whispers that the toy plane had embarrassed the Titan. But such whispers were quickly buried, for they threatened the reputation of the most expensive project in aviation history. Yet the truth refused to stay hidden. In the shadows of those exercises, observers noted how Gripen pilots grinned. They knew something others didn't. Gripen's data-sharing ability allowed entire squadrons to act like a single mind, passing targeting information instantly. One Gripen could see the enemy, another could fire, and a third could vanish into the clouds, all in perfect coordination. The F-35, despite all its technology, was shackled by complexity. The Gripen, by contrast, was pure freedom in the air. As the years went on, more nations began to notice. They asked questions. Why spend billions on a jet that required its own army of engineers just to fly a mission when Gripen offered agility, adaptability, and reliability? But the most shocking moment was still to come. For it wasn't in exercises that the world would see the truth. It was when the unexpected happened, when Gripen was finally pitted directly against the pride of American air power in a contest no one thought Sweden could win. That day began like any other, yet it would mark the moment the myth of the toy shattered forever. The Gripen-E was ready, the stage was set, and those who laughed were about to fall silent, for the small predator from Sweden was preparing to humiliate a giant in the skies. The exercise began under a silent sky. On one side, the F-35s, armed with their trillion-dollar reputation. On the other, the Gripens, modest but determined. The crowd expected a showcase of American dominance. Within minutes, the illusion cracked. The F-35s moved first, vanishing from radar, certain they were invisible. Gripen pilots didn't panic. Their aircraft wasn't just searching for echoes, it was listening. Electronic warfare turned the air into a web of signals, and the Gripens read it like a book. One by one, positions appeared on their displays. The invisible were no longer unseen. A Swedish pilot eased behind an F-35 and locked on silently. "Fox 3, he whispered, simulating the kill. The American jet never knew it had been caught. In the control room, the observers shifted uneasily. This was not supposed to happen, but the scoreboard was only beginning to tilt. Another F-35 tried to outflank, yet Gripen's data sharing turned the skirmish into a chess match. One distracted, another struck. Within seconds, a second kill was simulated. By the time the round ended, the Gripens had embarrassed the F-35s again and again. Not with brute force, but with guile. The toy was dismantling the giant. Whispers spread after the exercise. Pilots admitted the Swedish jets fought like wolves, moving as one through their advanced data link. The F-35s, for all their complexity, couldn't match the fluid coordination. The humiliation was too sharp to ignore, though reports were carefully softened before release. And yet, the truth traveled. Pilots carried the stories home, describing Gripens that appeared from nowhere, struck, and vanished before counterattack. Commanders privately admitted that in real combat, such an enemy would be a nightmare. Engineers noted that Gripen could be refueled and relaunched in minutes, while the F-35 often sat grounded, waiting for its labyrinth of support crews. What stung most was the cost. Nations had poured fortunes into the F-35, believing it unbeatable. But Gripen's victories raised a question. Had they bought gold, or only the illusion of it? Countries forced into F-35 contracts began to glance toward Sweden. For the United States, the risk wasn't just military, it was political. Gripen threatened not only the F-35's reputation, but America's grip on its allies. The incident didn't fade. In one real interception over Europe, Gripens maneuvered against F-35s with shocking ease. Cameras caught fragments of the dance, grainy but undeniable. Officials downplayed it, but the footage spread. It confirmed what exercises had hinted. The toy could strike even outside scripted war games. The humiliation had become undeniable. Gripen was no longer dismissed, it was feared. But with fear came resentment. Whispers of pressure, sabotage, and threats swirled around Saab. Still, the pilots knew. They had seen how the fox could humble the lion. And deep inside the halls of power, the humiliation burned hot enough to spark something darker. The silence after the incident weighed heavier than gunfire. The footage of Gripen sliding behind F-35s spread further than anyone expected. Pilots whispered, analysts dissected, and commanders avoided questions. In Washington, silence turned to fury. The F-35 was more than an aircraft. It was a trillion-dollar symbol of control. And that symbol had just been pierced by a jet the world once mocked as a toy. Gripen had never been harmless. Born in a small nation surrounded by giants, it was crafted to survive without luxuries. Where the F-35 required vast bases, Gripen could launch from a frozen highway. Where the F-35 demanded armies of engineers, Gripen needed a handful of technicians and minutes of time. It was never designed to be glamorous. It was designed to endure. That very endurance now made the world question everything it thought it knew about air power. In Stockholm, Saab's engineers watched the uproar with quiet pride. They had promised no miracle weapon, only efficiency, adaptability, and survival. Yet those traits proved deadlier than supercomputers and bloated budgets. The F-35 was strong, but its strength relied on fragile foundations. Gripen was lean, and lean was dangerous. But humiliation has consequences. Allies who saw the Gripen's success grew curious, and curiosity threatened American dominance. Nations asked why they should mortgage their budgets for a jet that often sat grounded, when Sweden offered something reliable and free of political strings. Brazil's order for Gripens signaled a shift, and others quietly studied the jet despite U.S. warnings. For Washington, this wasn't about jets anymore. It was about loyalty. Whispers grew darker. Cyber attacks struck Saab. Media campaigns painted Gripen as inadequate. Diplomats warned that choosing Gripen meant risking alliances. Yet the stories refused to die. Pilots who had flown the Swedish jet became its fiercest defenders. They told of how it could turn tight corners, vanish into cloud cover, and return to the fight before heavier jets even restarted engines. They spoke of its data link, squadrons moving as one, striking faster than opponents could process. Each tale deepened the wound carved into the F-35's legend. The harshest truth was mathematical. For the cost of one F-35, a nation could field multiple Gripens. For every massive base the American jet required, Gripen needed nothing more than a stretch of road and a few ground crew. In real war, where chaos breaks chains of supply, Gripen's independence made it not weaker, but stronger. Analysts who once praised the F-35 now admitted quietly, if survival was the measure, Sweden's toy was no toy at all. Sweden never bragged. That silence made the humiliation sharper. While others boasted of invincibility, Gripen simply proved itself again and again. It became a ghost story, pilots in bars recounting how they were locked by Gripens they never saw. Online forums filled with rumors of classified results. Ordinary people repeated the tale. The small Scandinavian jet that embarrassed the world's most expensive weapon. The legend became unstoppable. Every denial only fed the mystery. Every whisper of sabotage only made the jet seem more dangerous. The humiliation had escaped control, spreading like a shadow across every country that had bought into the promise of the F-35. And yet the story was more than humiliation. It was a warning. Gripen's rise showed that cunning could humble cost, that adaptability could outlast arrogance. No empire of technology is immune to clever rivals. No giant can ignore the fox forever. The F-35 still flies, still dominates budgets, still carries its crown. But somewhere above the clouds, every pilot feels the same unease. What if the Gripen is out there? What if the small, silent hunter appears again, slipping past defenses, proving once more that survival beats spectacle? They said Sweden's Gripen was a toy. They laughed, they dismissed, they mocked. But history will remember how the toy humiliated the giant, not as an accident, but as proof that the smallest spark can shame the mightiest flame. The humiliation was complete, and the legend of Gripen was only beginning.